Emma's hands shook as she stepped off the dusty stagecoach, knowing her new husband waited somewhere in this godforsaken town. The Montana Territory stretched endlessly around her, a harsh landscape that matched the desperation driving her west. Behind her lay nothing but memories of her father's gambling debts and the promise that marriage to a stranger would solve everything. "You, Emma Walsh?" The voice belonged to a thick-set man with whiskey on his breath and meanness in his small eyes. Harold Brennan looked nothing like his letters had promised. "Yes, Emma started, but his meaty hand was already gripping her elbow, fingers digging deep enough to bruise. "Good. Paid good money for you. Let's get moving." He dragged her toward a rickety wagon, ignoring her stumbled protests. The ride to his claim passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by his occasional crude comments about what he expected from a wife. Emma's stomach churned as the reality of her situation became clear. This wasn't the respectable arrangement she'd hoped for. This was something far worse. Harold's soddy proved to be little more than a hole carved into a hillside, reeking of unwashed bodies and rotting food. The moment they crossed the threshold, his facade of civilization dropped completely. "Strip down," he ordered, already unbuckling his belt. "Time you started earning your keep." "Please, I need time to—" Emma backed toward the door, heart hammering. His backhand sent her sprawling. "Time for what? You're my wife now, bought and paid for." Emma tasted blood, her cheek blazing with pain. As Harold advanced with that horrible grin, something inside her snapped. She bolted for the door. "Get back here!" His roar followed her into the gathering dusk. Emma ran blindly across the prairie, her traveling dress catching on sagebrush and prairie grass. Behind her, Harold's shouts grew fainter, but his threats carried on the wind. She had no destination, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and that monster. The October night bit through her thin clothing as she stumbled across the rolling grassland. Her button-up boots weren't made for running, and soon her feet burned with blisters. Still, she pressed on, driven by terror and desperation. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting silver light across an endless sea of grass. Emma's legs gave out near a small creek, and she collapsed beside the water, gasping. Her reflection showed a wild-eyed girl with tangled hair and a swollen face. What had she done? There was nowhere to go, no money for passage home, and Harold would be looking for her. The prairie stretched in every direction, beautiful and merciless. Exhaustion finally claimed her near dawn. She curled against a boulder for wind protection, her body shaking with cold and fear. As consciousness faded, she thought she heard horses approaching, but her body refused to respond. When sunlight touched her face, Emma felt gentle hands checking her pulse. She opened her eyes to find herself surrounded by Lakota warriors, their faces painted for hunting. She tried to scramble away, but her body wouldn't obey. The tallest warrior knelt slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He had kind eyes and spoke in a low, soothing voice she couldn't understand. When she flinched, he immediately backed away, hands visible and empty. Chief Akacheta studied the frightened woman with growing concern. She bore fresh bruises and the hollow look of someone who'd known too much cruelty. Her fine dress was torn, her feet bloody from running. Most telling were her reactions, the way she cowered from any sudden movement, the terror in her eyes when she looked at him. He spoke quietly to his men, then approached again with infinite patience. This time, he simply wrapped his buffalo robe around her shoulders and lifted her carefully, feeling how she trembled. Whatever had driven her into the wilderness alone, it had been worse than facing death on the prairie. Emma woke to unfamiliar voices and the scent of sage, her body tensing for the blow that always came. The lodge around her was warm and dim, decorated with painted hides and unfamiliar symbols. An elderly Lakota woman sat nearby, grinding herbs with steady hands. "Awake," the woman said in careful English, offering Emma water in a carved bowl. Emma struggled to sit, every muscle protesting. The woman, Winona, she learned through gestures, examined her bruises with gentle clicks of disapproval. Her touch was nothing like Harold's grasping hands, and gradually Emma's rigid posture relaxed slightly. The lodge flap opened and the tall warrior from the prairie entered, moving slowly. Emma's body went rigid again, but he kept his distance, settling on the opposite side of the fire. He spoke quietly to Winona, his voice calm and respectful. "Akecheta," Winona said, pointing to the chief. "Good man. Help you." Emma watched him warily as he went about simple tasks, adding wood to the fire, checking weapons, speaking with other tribe members who came to report. His movements were economical and sure, but never threatening in her direction. When their eyes met accidentally, he looked away first, giving her space. As the day wore on, Emma began to notice details that confused her preconceptions. Akecheta listened carefully when others spoke, including the women. Children ran to him freely, and he lifted them with obvious affection. Most surprisingly, he seemed to be deliberately making himself less intimidating around her, moving slowly, speaking softly, keeping distance. When hunger finally overcame her fear, Emma accepted the bowl of stew Winona offered. The meat was tender and the broth rich with unfamiliar spices. As she ate, she caught Akecheta watching her with something that looked almost like relief. He said something to Winona, who nodded and turned to Emma. Akecheta asked, "You run from bad man?" Emma's spoon trembled. Slowly, she nodded. The chief's expression darkened with understanding. He spoke again, and Winona translated, "He say, you safe here. Bad man not touch you." That night, Emma lay on soft furs listening to the peaceful sounds of the village settling into sleep. For the first time in months, no one was going to hurt her. The realization brought unexpected tears. Outside, Akecheta maintained his vigil by the fire, a silent guardian ensuring her safety through the darkness. When Akecheta moved too quickly reaching for firewood, Emma's flinch made him freeze like he'd been struck. The morning had started peacefully, with Emma helping Winona prepare breakfast, but her nerves remained hair-trigger sensitive. Every sudden motion sent her scrambling backward. Akecheta set the wood down slowly and retreated to his usual respectful distance. He'd been learning English words from Winona, practicing them quietly by the fire each night. Now he tried one of them. "Sorry," he said carefully, the word thick with his accent. Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to learn her language, especially not to apologize for startling her. It's all right," she whispered, then repeated louder, "All right." He nodded and pointed to himself. "Akecheta learn English. You teach?" Over the following days, their lessons became a bridge between worlds. Emma taught him words for everyday things: fire, water, food, morning. He showed her Lakota words in return, his patient corrections helping her wrap her tongue around unfamiliar sounds. "Manai," he said, holding up the water bowl. "Manai," Emma repeated, earning his rare smile. These small exchanges felt safer than longer conversations. Neither pushed for personal details, content to exist in the present moment of shared learning. But gradually, Emma began to observe the life of the village around her. She watched Akacheta settle disputes with fairness, his judgment respected by all. She saw him honor the elders, play with children, and treat his wife. No, Winona explained, his grandmother who'd raised him after his parents died. The woman who'd been caring for Emma was family, not a servant. He good chief, Winona told her one afternoon as they watched Akacheta help repair an elderly man's lodge. People trust him. You trust too. Emma wanted to trust. The careful way he moved around her, never crowding her space, spoke to an understanding that went beyond words. When she worked alongside the women, she caught him glancing her way. Not with Harold's possessive hunger, but with something that looked almost protective. One evening, as autumn's chill settled over the camp, Emma sat closer to the fire than usual. Akacheta was carving something from a piece of wood, his hands steady and sure. The firelight caught the concentration on his face, and Emma found herself studying him without fear for the first time. He looked up and caught her gaze. Instead of looking away, she held it for a moment before offering a tentative smile. His answering expression transformed his stern features, making him look younger and infinitely gentle. "Thank you," Emma said softly, for everything." He nodded, understanding far more than her simple words conveyed. Then he held out what he'd been carving, a small wooden bird, its wings spread as if in flight. "Free," he said, placing it carefully beside her. "Like you." Emma picked up the carving with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the gesture's meaning. For the first time since arriving, she felt truly seen, not as property or burden, but as a person deserving of freedom and kindness. That night, she accepted the blanket he offered directly from his hands, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The contact didn't frighten her. Instead, it felt like a small, precious gift. The sound of approaching horses made Emma's blood turn to ice. She knew that angry shouting voice. Harold's bellowing carried across the prairie as he rode into the village with 3 other men, including someone wearing a sheriff's badge. Emma pressed against the lodge wall, her whole body shaking. She'd been helping Winona prepare morning meals when the riders appeared, and now there was nowhere to run. "Where is she?" Harold roared, dismounting heavily. "I know you got my wife." Akacheta emerged from his lodge with deliberate calm, flanked by several warriors. His presence seemed to fill the space between the angry white men and his people. When his eyes found Emma cowering in the doorway, his expression became granite. "This is Sheriff Morrison," the lawman announced, clearly uncomfortable but doing his job. "Harold Brennan has a legal claim to his wife. We're here to collect her." Akacheta listened to the translation from a warrior who spoke English, then responded in fluent Lakota. The translator turned to the sheriff. "The chief says the woman came to us injured and seeking refuge. She's under tribal protection now." Harold's face purpled with rage. "She's my property. I paid good money for her passage west, and she's going to honor her obligations." He started forward, but Akacheta stepped smoothly into his path. The 2 men locked eyes, Harold, red-faced and explosive, and Akacheta, still as stone but radiating quiet menace. The chief spoke a single word in Lakota, and instantly 24 warriors materialized from behind lodges, arrows nocked but not yet drawn. "Now see here," the sheriff started nervously. "We don't want trouble." "Then leave." Emma surprised herself by speaking up. She stepped from behind the lodge, her voice stronger than she felt. I won't go back to him. Harold's eyes lit with vicious triumph. There she is. Emma, get over here right now, or so help me. Or what? Akacheta's English was careful but clear. You hurt her again? The question hung in the air like a blade. Harold's mouth worked soundlessly, his threats suddenly impotent in the face of Akacheta's steady gaze. She's legally bound to me, Harold finally sputtered. The law's on my side. Akacheta spoke to his translator again, never taking his eyes off Harold. The chief says, the warrior interpreted, that your laws mean nothing here. The woman stays under his protection. Any man who tries to take her will answer to him personally. The threat was delivered with such quiet certainty that even the sheriff took a step back. Harold, however, was too stupid or too mean to recognize the danger. You think you can just steal a man's wife? He sneered. I'll be back with more men. You? Akacheta moved faster than Emma had ever seen him move. In one fluid motion he was directly in front of Harold, close enough that the white man stumbled backward. Try, Akacheta said softly. The single word carried enough menace to make Harold's bluster die in his throat. He looked around at the circle of warriors, at Emma standing safely behind their chief, and finally at the sheriff who was already backing toward his horse. This ain't over, Harold muttered, but he was already retreating. Yes, Akacheta replied calmly. It is. Emma stepped from behind Akacheta to face her husband herself, her voice steady for the first time in years. The sight of Harold's familiar scowl no longer paralyzed her with terror. Standing in the circle of the tribe's protection, she finally felt strong enough to speak her truth. I won't go back to you, Harold, she said clearly. Not ever. His face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little. He lunged forward, hand raised to strike. He never reached her. Akacheta intercepted him with deadly precision, catching Harold's wrist and twisting until the bigger man dropped to his knees with a yelp of pain. Touch her, Akacheta said quietly, and die. The sheriff stepped forward nervously. Now, Chief, we don't want any killing. Then take him away, Akacheta replied, releasing Harold with a shove that sent him sprawling. And tell all who ask. The woman belongs to herself now. Harold scrambled to his feet, cradling his wrist and spitting mad. You think hiding behind these savages makes you safe? I'll get a territorial marshal, bring back a whole troop if I have to. You're my wife. No, Emma said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. I was never your wife. I was your prisoner. The truth of those words shattered something inside her that had been holding her back. She looked at Harold, really looked at him, and saw not the monster who'd haunted her nightmares, but a pathetic bully whose power over her had been built entirely on fear. You can bring 100 men, she continued, stepping closer to Akacheta's solid warmth. I'll never willingly go anywhere with you again. Harold's eyes darted between Emma's determined face and the wall of warriors surrounding them. Even he seemed to realize that his threats rang hollow here. But his pride wouldn't let him retreat gracefully. This ain't legal, he snarled at the sheriff. Do something. Sheriff Morrison looked deeply uncomfortable. Ma'am, he addressed Emma, the law does recognize marriage contracts made under false pretenses. Emma interrupted. He lied about everything. His character, his circumstances, his intentions. That contract was fraud from the beginning. Akacheta spoke quietly to his translator, and the warrior stepped forward. The chief asks if the white man's law forces women to stay with men who beat them. The sheriff's face reddened. Well, no, but then the law agrees with our decision, the translator concluded smoothly. Harold made one last desperate grab for control. Emma, you come with me right now, or I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman runs off with Indians. You'll never be respectable again. Emma almost smiled at that. Respectability? She looked around at the people who'd shown her more kindness in weeks than she'd known in years. I'd rather be free. She moved to stand directly beside Akacheta, close enough that their arms brushed. The contact felt like coming home. I choose to stay, she said, her words carrying clearly across the tense silence. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Harold's face went white with impotent fury, but even he could see the battle was lost. As the sheriff herded him back toward their horses, he shouted final threats that sounded increasingly hollow. Emma watched them ride away until they disappeared into the prairie distance. Only then did she realize she was holding Akacheta's hand, her fingers interlaced with his strong ones. "Are you certain?" he asked softly, his English careful but sincere. Emma looked up into his kind eyes and saw her future, not as someone's property, but as a woman who'd finally learned to choose love over fear. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm certain." Emma's hand found Akacheta's as they watched the sunrise, her wedding ring from another life glinting once before she pulled it off forever. The thin gold band had marked her as Harold's property. But here among the Lakota people, she needed no symbol except the eagle feather Akacheta had woven into her hair the night before. 3 months had passed since Harold's failed attempt to reclaim her. True to his threats, he'd returned with a territorial marshal and 6 armed men. But they'd found the winter camp empty. The tribe had moved deeper into the territory, to places white law couldn't easily reach. Eventually, even the marshal had admitted defeat. A woman who didn't want to be found in the vast Montana wilderness simply wouldn't be found. Emma had spent those months learning not just the Lakota language, but their ways of seeing the world. Winona had taught her to prepare traditional foods, to work with buffalo hide, and to understand the intricate relationships that bound the tribe together. The other women had welcomed her slowly, their initial suspicion melting as they saw her genuine desire to belong. But it was Akacheta who had taught her the most important lesson: how to trust again. He'd courted her with the patience of seasons changing, never pushing, always giving her space to choose. A carved bird left beside her sleeping furs. A particularly beautiful sunrise pointed out with gentle words. His steady presence during her nightmares, speaking soft Lakota words until her trembling stopped. The day she'd first reached for his hand, he'd gone very still, as if afraid to break the spell. When she'd smiled and moved closer to the fire they shared, his answering expression had been worth all the fear she'd overcome to get there. "Emma," he said now, using the English name she'd asked him to keep. "You know what this means? To stay?" She turned to face him fully, studying the strong features that had become more dear to her than any face she'd ever known. "Tell me." "My people. They will accept you as my wife if you choose it. But there is no going back to the white world after. You become Lakota in truth." Emma thought of the life she was leaving behind. The suffocating propriety, the powerlessness, the constant fear. Then she looked around at the camp, waking up around them, children laughing as they ran between lodges, women calling cheerful greetings, men preparing for the day's hunt. This was a world where she had value beyond her ability to serve others, where her voice mattered, where love was freely given rather than grudgingly bartered. "Will you have me?" she asked softly, not as someone running from something else, but as someone choosing this life. "Choosing you." Akacheta's smile transformed his entire face. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "I have waited for you my whole life, even before I knew to wait." The ceremony took place at sunset, with the whole tribe gathered in a circle. Emma wore a dress of soft doeskin that Winona had decorated with intricate beadwork, her hair braided with eagle feathers and sweet grass. Akacheta stood tall beside her in his finest ceremonial clothing, but his eyes never left her face. The ritual was unlike anything from her old world. No priests or legal documents, just the simple exchange of vows witnessed by people who had become her family. When the medicine man bound their hands with braided grass, Emma felt the last of her old fears dissolve. She was no longer Emma Walsh, desperate mail-order bride. She was no longer Harold Brennan's escaped property. She was simply Emma, beloved of Akacheta, member of the Lakota people, free to write her own story at last. As the celebration continued around them, Akacheta led her to the edge of camp where they could watch the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Emma leaned against his solid warmth, feeling safer than she'd ever imagined possible. In the distance, coyotes sang to the moon, and the prairie wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. "Only one," she whispered, and felt him tense slightly. She smiled and pressed a kiss to his jaw. "That it took me so long to find you." Akacheta's arms tightened around her, and Emma closed her eyes, finally home.